Welcome, Aurelia, to our Visionary Heroes interview series. We're happy to have you here today.
Thank you, Christy. It's really good to be here with you today.
Thank you. We'll start off with a simple question. So what is your name, where do you work, and what is your role?
My name's Aurelia Figueroa, and I'm head of sustainability at Breitling.
And how long have you been in this position?
I've been in this position for just over 2 years right now.
And what attracted you to this role?
I think what attracted me to this role is that sustainability is really at the center of so many societal transformations. And I think it's a promising opportunity to really be able to address topics related to social transformation, related to environmental justice, related to geopolitics. And it's a fundamentally fascinating role. And really a good role to be able to work with people and to really be able to drive meaningful change that matters to me as a person and as an individual, and as well to our own stakeholders and to society more broadly.
Have you seen a change in the 2 years since you took on this role?
Absolutely. I think that the last 2 years, so starting then when I did in April 2020, have been...
Beginning of COVID.
Exactly. Have been fundamental for the ongoing sustainable transformation globally. And in addition to that, I think that the speed of this change and transformation has only increased substantially, even in the last months. So I see, for example, far more urgency, which I think is very good. That's always been the order of the game, and I think that more and more of us are recognizing the urgency with which we need to proceed on subjects that are related to those addressed by the Sustainable Development Goals, and that we are seeing shifts in mindsets that are enabling actors to introduce or to deepen their commitment to these topics. We're seeing, of course, a lot of positive developments in terms of technological transformation. And I think we are starting to see the very nascent beginnings of behavioral shifts, but really just at the very beginning. And I think that on that subject, behavioral shifts are something that I really have in mind. How do we bring about, at the end of the day, those human level changes that need to occur across society in order to enable the transformation that we all need?
You mentioned individual behaviors and what individuals can do to be more sustainable. I think one of the challenges is that individuals look at companies or look at governments and they think, you know, they are the ones that can actually move the needle much quicker than our own individual actions. So how is that something that you can, you know, convince people that their individual actions actually do make a difference?
I think what's really important in that regard is providing meaningful data. So we, for example, conducted a product carbon footprint on our bestseller, in which we detail the results of that in our 2021 Sustainability Mission Report. And in doing so, we really challenged ourselves to provide relatable information. So we know that the carbon impact of the materials in this watch are amounting to roughly the average bottle of wine. And we really wanted to communicate within what is for some people, you know, a common product, in order for them to be able to understand and have something comparable, rather than speaking about kilograms of carbon, which I think in the mainstream is not meaning a lot to a lot of people. So I think product carbon footprinting, water footprinting, and really giving people this data in a way that's meaningful and also comparable is something that can really have an important role in driving that decision making for people.
So the UN Global Compact has 10 guiding principles for business. How are you implementing that at Breitling?
So we at Breitling implement the UN Global Compact 10 guiding principles in our review of suppliers, in our own activities. So those are, for example, enshrined in key policy instruments that we have, our ESG policy, our employee code of conduct.
So let's switch to watchmaking.
All right.
So the watchmaking industry, supply chains can be complex because there's lots of different components that go into watches, precious metals, precious stones, leather, etc. So how are you moving towards sort of a more sustainable watch making process at Breitling?
There's a range of measures that we're taking, and The first one that we implemented was to really begin a dialogue and a consultation with our key suppliers to understand, first of all, how are they performing in terms of ESG and sustainability, which actions do they have planned, and how could we support them in that process. And as well, which information sharing could they share with us as well. We really view this as a bi-directional opportunity. And one thing that we did is we implemented Ecovatis sustainability benchmark assessments. So these are independently verified. And we asked our key suppliers, over 70% of them by spend in direct operations, to complete a baseline assessment. That really gave us the data that we needed and the information that we needed to begin a conversation on sustainability. And this is something that we will continue to ask our suppliers to complete, and that we at Breitling complete as well on an annual basis. So that addressed the data part. Then we've engaged in a number of on-site visits to also conduct our own audits and to really have a face-to-face exchange on our shared principles in terms of sustainability. Then we also look to support our suppliers in their activities. So for example, we have the Breitling Carbon Fund, which we disperse to suppliers to support their carbon reduction efforts. As well as that, we have a number of interesting innovations at Breitling from a product level perspective. So we've released EcoNil straps with outer known. This is made of upcycled ghost fishing nets that are retrieved from the ocean, and they've been on the market now for a few years, having been introduced by my colleagues some years ago. And as well, we have a really exciting flat pack packaging, which is really revolutionizing the industry. It was developed by my colleagues in product marketing to really be able to reduce our footprint in that regard and introduce what is for our industry, which is associated with really substantial packaging, quite a revolution. So we have these dialogues that we embark upon with our suppliers. We assist them and we exchange with them to develop sustainability roadmaps to drive process moving ahead. We have a number of product relevant innovations that we will continue to follow up on. And we look specifically at sourcing. So most recently, we became a member of Swiss Better Gold, and we have in the last year been sourcing Swiss Better Gold from a range of suppliers in South America. And that's really a chance for us to look at our top 3 material topics, which are social impacts along the value chain, environmental impacts along the value chain, and product integrity, and be able to address this by sourcing gold in a responsible manner.
When you were talking about energy consumption and gigawatts and what that actually means to individuals, how are you basically translating the steps that you are taking in your communication with consumers?
Well, we've started in the last year with our inaugural sustainability mission report, and we've had a range of other communications to consumers. For example, when we introduced the sustainable watch box in 2020, we also gave consumers the chance, if they wanted, to maintain the status quo watch box. However, if they did that, we asked them to provide a donation to Sugi, which is working to rewild urban areas through reforestation using the Miyawaki method. And this is one way that I think is a really tangible means in which we've engaged consumers. I think there's definitely a lot more to come in that regard, and certainly engaging consumers in sustainability, engaging all of our stakeholders in sustainability, employees, suppliers, civil society, is really important to us. And another way in which we've done that is when we conducted our inaugural Materiality Assessment in 2020, which included a range of both internal and external stakeholders. We sought to be very inclusive in that regard and really get the input of a broad swath of stakeholders to define our sustainability strategy for the years ahead. So we've engaged and also customers in that process in a really fundamental manner, and this is something that I know that we're looking forward to doing going ahead.
And how are customers responding to this sustainability shift, you know, this flat packaging that you mentioned? How are they responding? Because one thinks of purchasing luxury goods, the the packaging is actually part and parcel of, I would say, that experience. It's sort of an extension of the product itself.
I know that I've heard a range of different commentary in terms of how the box has been received. I have one feedback at the very top of my head, and it is a positive feedback. I know that there has been, as I mentioned, a range of takes on that, but I know that there is even one customer who postponed a purchase until the new packaging was available. They were so excited to get it. I think in other cases it has been a transition and, like you said, a real departure from the traditional packaging, and that was one of the reasons that we continued to provide the old packaging as well for some time. So that's something where we really are trying to facilitate, I think, the different demands and requirements of stakeholders, and to really have a big tent approach to sustainability and to including our stakeholders in that regard.
So do you still have the other packaging available, or has that been completely phased out?
I believe at this time the other packaging has been completely phased out.
So back to your role, what types of stakeholders do you interact with on a day-to-day?
On a day-to-day basis, I interact with a range of stakeholders, so suppliers, internal counterparts, colleagues at Breitling, civil society, a range of organizations with whom we hold partnerships, media, and those are, generally speaking, the key interfaces that I have. I interact with customers in my role at present on a less regular basis. I hope that that's something that could increase in the future, but that's my main constellation. And that's one of the things that I enjoy most about my job. And I believe that in this role, I have really been able to benefit, and Breitling has really been able to benefit from the willingness of all of these counterparts to share their perspective, to share their expertise. There's substantial and impressive expertise in our industry, and to really be generous about sharing best practices and humbleness, and also sharing and accepting the advice of others. We've been able to benefit and learn from our suppliers and their best practices. Where we have the chance, we share our own good practices with them. And I think that there's been a lot of intellectual humility on the part of everyone to really be able to drive these parts forward. Sustainability is such a broad and diverse topic. I, for one, I would never, ever call myself a sustainability expert, because it maybe one day, if you achieve being sustainability expert, it will last maybe for a glorious second, because the state of the art is evolving so quickly that will quickly, I think, be overcome. So it's important that we're able to benefit from the collective knowledge and wisdom around us if we really want to be able to drive sustainability.
I like that intellectual humility. I think that's actually really interesting, because the luxury industry normally is very, I wouldn't say secretive, but very, I would say, protective of, brands. And so thinking about cooperation and exchanging best practices is not something that you would normally think of when you think of the luxury industry.
I understand what you're saying, and I think that to date there has been relatively little collaboration in our industry compared to some others, and certainly it could benefit. We are oftentimes sourcing from the same suppliers. We are asking them similar requests, so it would behoove us, I think, to continue our cooperation, especially on these shared pursuits that we have. I am starting to see really positive movement in that regard. I was speaking yesterday to a colleague at another watchmaker, and he and I were able to have an open exchange on the topic of carbon measurement. And he and I really shared the fact that it would benefit our industry to continue to expand this, and we outlined some potential ways in which we could do so. So I think that that's something that it will slowly start to come along, and I think in the end it really has to come along, because all roads lead to sustainability, I guess, and we'll be meeting each other along the way. So I am hopeful that this is something that will continue to improve.
And where does the responsibility lie with that? Who's going to say, we are going to create a coalition of sustainability-focused counterparts?
Well, perhaps on the way, if any coalition were to be created, I think it's really then, as a starting point, just those bilateral connections, coalitions of the willing who are eager to engage with each other and to maybe drive a topic on which we're really focusing our efforts at this time. So it seems that it's developing right now in an organic way, and let's see where that leads us in the future.
Perhaps people will reach out after this discussion. Okay. Never know. So you've mentioned the word hopeful a few times. So hopeful about progress, hopeful about achieving the SDGs, hopeful about collaboration. Is there anything that frustrates you in your role?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I would say, to be really frank, I'll use this as a venting opportunity, Christy, so thank you for asking. I am frustrated with data availability, and it can be really challenging to achieve and require so many resources, so many time resources especially, and it's so vital because we can't speak about impact if we don't have a baseline. So it's just something that we have to do, and at the same time it's challenging. So it's a big opportunity. I'm thinking of the number of colleagues that have been supporting the sustainability efforts at Breitling, both internally and externally in that regard, and I really share my gratitude with them in this moment that they've been able to help us move towards bringing data online. But that's an area where sometimes some frustration appears. I think in general it's moving in the right direction, and frustration is not a sentiment that I feel often. But sometimes it emerges a bit in regards to data availability.
In terms of completeness, in terms of amount, what specifically?
Well, I would
or
say
transparency. Yeah.
It's a good question. So I would say actually just pure availability in and of itself. And sometimes I would actually say one of the reasons it frustrates me is it upsets me that these figures were not tracked sooner, but that we as a collective, as a society, did not find these important to track earlier. And then when we move beyond pure availability itself, then we go to the fact that, of course, if we talk about greenhouse gas emissions, for example, we do have a lot of secondary data that we can rely on, and there's numerous recognized data sets that one can reference. And sometimes those average emissions factors that we use, we see them veering strongly from what we measure in terms of primary data. So then there's the challenge in terms of data quality, like you were mentioning before, and the urgency to move from secondary to primary data as quickly as possible. And in addition to that, then I would say then finally data management. Where are you actually storing this? How many different systems do you wish to involve? Is there going to be integration? So there's a lot to unpack in that regard.
So if we look back at a chief sustainability officer or a sustainability leader, what is your advice for somebody that is coming into a role like this?
My advice is to listen to your stakeholders at the very beginning, and listen to your stakeholders repeatedly and often. Reflect back to them what you've heard. Make sure that your understanding is correct. Iterate that understanding with others. Wherever you have these disparate viewpoints, so wherever you have somebody who's at A and Z, that to me is the most fascinating and biggest opportunity. Why is there this bifurcation and these beliefs? And what's the gray zone in between? And where can we meet each other? And where else do we find each other as common allies? So I would say listening, reflecting, consulting, and providing feedback would be the core recommendation that I would have. I think that if you can really ensure that you've taken in the viewpoints of your stakeholders, and stakeholders are in the end people, so we can just call them people in the end, if you've taken into account the concerns of the people in this constellation in which you're working, then if you've been able to aggregate that in a way that in the end everyone says, well, it's not exactly what I believe, but yes, I see the overall perspective, and yes, I see myself in this collective representation, and yes, I can support that. then I think that in the numerous challenges that come in the sustainability journey, the number of times that you will receive new information and have to review what you've committed to, then you'll be able to look at everyone in the room and everyone beyond the room with a common understanding and say, this is what we agreed upon. It sounds like, or double check, it sounds like it's what we still find relevant. And we're still going to continue in this direction. We have some new guidance on how to continue in that direction, and let's find a way to do so.
You mentioned that if you are, or somebody that wants to call themselves a sustainability expert, it will be obsolete in a New York minute. How do you stay on top of all of the changes that are happening in the sustainability space, given the acceleration that you mentioned you've seen over the past 2 years?
It's a huge challenge, and for me, it's a mix of relying on trusted media outlets and diverse media outlets as well, going to relevant events in our local community, so participating in UN Global Compact events, attending Green Buzz events in the Zurich area, or any number of online events, of course, in order to really come up to speed with those. And I think really having exchanges with our key counterparts like suppliers to understand what they're paying attention to, certainly with civil society and the whole range of stakeholders, in order to be able to understand where we need to focus our efforts and how we need to prepare those frameworks that will be addressing our actions as we move ahead.
One of the things that you mentioned, you have suppliers in many parts of the world. I think what is interesting in sustainability is that we often look at it from a Western context, where we are, where we are at, not kind of bearing in mind that other geographies or areas are, I would say, maybe less advanced. How do you reconcile that in terms of, wanting everyone to be at sort of the same level playing field, but understanding that there's those regional differences in terms of advancement and development?
I would say that one of the ways that we reconcile it is to really consult and understand what is happening on the ground. So, for example, participating in missions to mining locations in collaboration with Swiss Better Gold, visiting the local communities, being with our local counterparts who are running those operations to really understand how they are conducting their due diligence methods, how they are implementing policies, how they are engaging communities. And then once we, in collaboration with those partners, have really done our homework and understood the local framework and understood the needs of our counterparts, then co-developing and co-financing means in order to bring sustainability up to speed. And really taking an approach where we're taking the consultation of our stakeholders to understand how we can support them to go ahead, and just understanding the role that we can play. And at the same time, what we've really seen in engaging with these stakeholders is also how advanced they are in these areas and how much firsthand knowledge and experience they have. So in that case, it's an opportunity for us to step back and to learn from them as well.
That's interesting, because I think a lot of people, when you discuss sustainability, I think no one argues that it isn't important and that it isn't an imperative, but I think a lot of companies sometimes see it as a cost and see the cost associated with becoming more sustainable. So it's always, how do you show them that it is an opportunity as opposed to something that is a cost?
It's a good question, and I think that what we have really found with our stakeholders is that they have, in so many cases, recognized the opportunity of sustainability. So they've recognized that when they have positive working relationships with their local community, they have less instances of negative risk that could impact the company. We certainly see it as an opportunity in being able to speak to new stakeholder groups and to engage them in meaningful storytelling related to the impact that we're able to have. and as well to engage our employees. We've recently had a number of corporate volunteering days in the local forest in which we are operating in cooperation with the Forest Stewardship Council in Switzerland and our local forestry offices. And these have been really meaningful days of exchange where we've learned a lot about forestry management, about sustainability generally. We've been able to exchange with colleagues from all different departments. So sustainability to me is then it's a bit of a forum. It's a meeting ground, I think, for an exchange of ideas, for us to really be able to understand the other. And so I really see it as an opportunity for personal connection in that regard as well.
Sustainability is such a broad topic, and you mentioned the different types of stakeholders that you engage with. What skills are needed for somebody who is either a chief sustainability officer or somebody who is a sustainability leader?
I would say listening skills are essential in that regard, and really being able to listen. And I would say another important skill is accepting the situation for what it is. And it's a challenge in sustainability because part of the name of the game is I want to change this, and I want to do it quickly too, you know. And I think that before you can change anything, you have to just accept the situation for how it is, why it's that way. There's validity in systems as unsuited as they may be for sustainability. And in sustainability, we talk about, you know, reusing and recycling. And I think we really need to understand those systems in which we are working to be able to take what is useful from them and use it in the transformation that we wish to create ourselves. So listening, accepting, and really seeing opportunities to use what is there to create these transformations. And of course, very importantly, collaboration. Really being able to work together with people to design collaboration in meaningful ways.
What about influencing?
I would say yes and no, because to me, influencing then to me would be providing people with the information that they need to make their own decisions. And I think then communication is, I think, how I would term it more. I think influencing, depending on the manner in which it's done, then it needs to really be something that's homegrown and that somebody has really come to this understanding or transition of their own volition. And perhaps you've provided useful input in that regard and useful consultations and opportunities for collaboration. And in the end, it's really the willingness of the own individual to do so.
What would you like your legacy to be?
Oh, geez. I would definitely like my legacy to be shared, and I would like to be a part of a broader legacy, and that we have been able to have meaningful environmental impact to save ourselves from impending environmental catastrophe, to respect the rights of all living beings on the planet, and that we have been able to have meaningful societal transformation in a manner that everyone is able to live in a comfortable way and that their own rights are respected.
How do you see the sustainability function evolving in the next 10 years?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. And given the rapidity of change in the last year, I can only imagine what that is going to look like. I don't even know if I can wager a guess on that. Hopefully it continues on the successful horizontal collaboration that's been in place in order to drive change, especially in corporate settings, and is continuing to onboard people with ever greater types of experience to facilitate the technological nature of the shift, the societal and behavioral nature of the shift, and in a way that is really reflecting the aspirations of all of us and leading to greater shared prosperity. Should
the function be at some point obsolete because it's embedded in every function within an organization?
Right. It's a really good question, and I think that in short, my answer is yes. And I've often said, that my goal is to work myself out of a job and then eventually find a new role for myself. And I think the answer is yes. I think that ideally sustainability becomes eventually a part of all of our own subjects that we take care for, and that this continues well into the future and becomes ever more embedded.
We can only hope.
Yes, yes.
Thank you so much, Aurelia, for your time. It was very interesting to hear your point of view. We wish you all the best in your role and driving sustainability at Breitling.
Great. Thank you so much, Christy. It was really lovely to be here with you today.
Thank you.